Through the Noise with your host, Ernesto Glucksmann.
We're on. Andy, thank you for joining me on the show, joining me on the Zoom call. Appreciate it. I'm excited. Carol Lee, and I forgot what episode we worked on, but she mentioned you would be a great person to have on the show. And I started looking into the company and the stuff that you guys do. And I'm like, yes, got to have you on. Andy Sweetman, and you are the sales and marketing director over at Futamura. Did I say it right?
That's correct.
Futamura. Yeah. And in particular, for you guys, that is sort of this bioplastics film material, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for food packaging principally.
Yeah, and it's a cellulose material. Can you give us a sense of what that world is? What's the product and the services there that you guys sort of provide?
Yeah, so if we go back a few years, then pretty much everybody knows the name cellophane. And in many parts of the world, it's kind of considered a generic description of a plastic film. But actually, it's our trademark. And it describes a material that's a film that is derived from cellulose rather than from plastic. So ironically, everyone who thinks cellophane is the generic for a plastic is 100% wrong. It actually means film made of cellulose. We've been involved in the cellophane market for many, many years. And what happened really was that we became aware towards the very end of the 1990s, the beginning of the noughties, that there were new standards developing to measure the biodegradability and compostability of packaging materials. And that seemed to us to be an opportunity. So we kind of assumed that because our materials are derived from cellulose, that they would automatically be biodegradable and compostable. But actually what we found is when we put them through these really quite draconian tests, they all failed. So we learned quite quickly that a little bit of the wrong materials can impact the biodegradation. So that led to a whole R&D program of work starting around the turn of the millennium.
So you guys are, I guess, the cellophane. It's like the tissue for, you're like the Kleenex for tissue boxes or something here in the U.S.
It's a bit like that, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And and how long ago? So I guess the history of the cellophane. How long has the company been sort of working with this product?
Yeah, I mean, we became Futamura in 2016. Previously, we were known as Innovia, and prior to that, under other names as well. But we always manufactured conventional plastic films and the cellulose-derived materials. We became part of the Futamura group, who also make, again, both cellulose and plastics 4 years ago. But the big development program for our biodegradable and compostable films, which we call NatureFlex, that really kicked off, started the work around the year 2000 and launched the first materials in about 2003.
So that's interesting because I guess at the company, since you're doing the conventional plastic and you're also doing the cellophane.
Call it cello for sure. That's what we do.
Okay. It's early morning for me over here in the Washington D.C. area. So you're able to see just kind of the demand request for these sort of products, right? I mean, were you using, so the cellophane goes into some of the food packaging, right, as a barrier for moisture, barriers for whatever. Were you also selling sort of plastic only, conventional plastic film in the same product class?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you're able to actually track where it's been. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big difference is plastic films are very, very low cost. Okay. So if you go back to sort of from the 70s, 80s, 90s, the market, which used to be traditional cellophane, was very largely replaced by plastic films on the grounds principally of cost. What we then had in the remaining cellophane market were customers who either had a very special technical need to use that grade, or maybe they had machinery which could only run cellophane and struggled to run the plastics. The big change for us as we moved from cellophane towards our biodegradable and compostable product line, which is called NatureFlex, was the realization that the more and more consumers were saying, well, where do our materials come from? And what's the impact of using plastics? And it kind of started off with, I would say, the pioneers in the natural, organic type segments, who were the first to start saying, well, can we have a more sustainable product offering than just using plastic, which is obviously derived from oil. So that led to us working to develop these materials to meet these new standards. But all the way along the line, we've had one foot in both camps, if you like. And I actually, personally, I think that's an advantage, because it means we're not just a bunch of eco warriors, sort of with no concept of the reality of the packaging world. We are packaging people. We see the pros and cons of plastics and the pros and cons of new technologies and so on. So it gives us a great foothold because we understand packaging well. And I'm not anti-plastic, but I'm a great believer in the move towards more sustainable packaging materials for now and for the future.
And I mean, that kind of, just on the scale and size, that gives you, to me, I just think that gives you a view of how much of the demand is actually really changing. Do you have some, I mean, let me back up a little bit. Since plastic came into play, but the cellular product had existed prior to it, why is the plastic film so much cheaper? What's the key aspect of plastic that makes it just cheaper to produce at this point?
Well, the big reason is scale.
Okay.
So if you think of the might of the oil industry and the scale of the oil industry, and as part of that, you can create plastics. The actual polymers are produced on an enormous scale. And at the same time, the actual manufacturing machinery evolved through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on to become wider, bigger, faster. So there's a scale advantage on conventional plastics at pretty much every element of the chain.
From like extraction to just getting the vats in, to separation, to then the machinery that you actually create the sheets. All of that just simply has gotten bigger because there was so much of it to work with and sell in bulk.
Right.
Got it.
Now, to a degree, with bioplastic materials, once you can process the polymers and the raw materials, you could potentially run them on some of the same conversion machinery to make the films. So you can maybe benefit from some of the later scale, but what you don't have is the scale at the extraction phase.
The bulk biomaterials, the bulk plants.
Yeah, the polymer, let's call it.
Got it. Because that market isn't big it's not as big as the oil market right now, or there's not as much farms creating it. But are those costs evolving, or what's that look like?
Well, that's what I think we'll see happen, really. So to put it in kind of scale, you measure the manufacturing output globally for things like polyethylenes and polypropylenes by the millions of tons. The largest bioplastic materials are maybe 150,000 to 200,000 per annum.
Okay.
So they're kind of like 1% in output, 1 to 2% of the polymer output of bio. So it's
a mountain to climb.
It's a huge mountain to climb, and it is interesting because when you've got such a disparity between those two industries, the bioplastics industry, I think most people will tell you it's growing by 30% or so per annum, but from a very low basis. All it takes is maybe 1, 2, 3% growth in the plastics industry, and you'll find that you've put more plastic on the ground each year than you have bioplastic.
Oh, so right. It's just in totality of it all.
Yeah, in totality. So we still live in very much a plastic world, for better or for worse.
However, one of the things I had come across, just kind of looking around, you mentioned it in a video, packaging as a marketing tool, in a sense.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate about that potential? So sort of what's attractive about that 1% that you should reconsider?
Well, I think the way you need to look at this is with scale comes economy. And so plastic materials are very much cheaper. all of these emerging biomaterials, they're much lower volume output. They're the fruits of recent R&D. So they are typically 3, maybe 4 times the price of conventional plastics. So if you're going to ask someone to pay maybe 3 times the price, you need to offer something special with it. Now, it sounds terrifying, doesn't it, to say I'm going to triple your packaging costs?
Yeah. This is a hard sell for you, Andy.
It is. No, that's a hard sell. That really is a hard sell. But actually what happens is that's the price, if you like, at the raw material stage. And when you go on to print it, to convert it and so on, that some of that cost penalty reduces. But the other thing is the final pack cost. So what you find is to use a conventional plastic, or to then switch to a biomaterial, we find in most cases it's maybe a cent on the price of the packaging. On the product.
Sort of net package cost. Here's your package. So, it's about one cent.
That's right. So let's imagine you had a product that you were putting on the market, a packaged product at $1.99. You'd need to put it on the market at $2 to cover the additional packaging costs.
Once it's all said and done, and the planning, the designing, all that's been done, that's not bad at all. That's not okay. I can absorb that.
And that's the key. And that's why we say to people, you need to think about the marketing of this. So we're all aware of the fact that we're misusing plastic, particularly after life, after its sort of valuable life as packaging. If it's going to cost you a penny to become more sustainable, talk about it with your customers. Let them know what you're doing, that you're pioneers in the move towards more sustainable packaging solutions. And that particularly fits well, again, as I mentioned earlier, with things like the food pioneers within the natural, health and wellness, organic categories, where it just kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Natural food in natural packaging. So those are the customers who've been the first to move. They're lighter on their feet than maybe the big players. And they've twigged that, yes, we can actually, instead of kind of being a bit ashamed of our packaging, we can actually talk proudly about it. Mm-hmm. So get the value for money, really, as much as it's great to be doing something for the environment. At the end of the day, if the product doesn't sell, you don't move forward. So you have to put the two things together.
How do you see the future of this, though, expanding beyond? I mean, where would it need to? What would be the well, just on the scale of it? What's an inflection point for sort of the next 2% doubling this? Which sounds ridiculous as I say it, but like, where do you see potential adjustments into where it expands simply beyond, like, I guess here in the Washington DC area, Whole Foods is a big fancy store area, right? Where this packaging probably sells well because that's higher price points. But how do you get it into more conventional stores or products?
Well, I think
stores.
Yeah, I think what we'll see is a number of different factors. So going forward, we will recycle more plastic than we do today. Our recycling rates of plastic are very, very low. There are concerted efforts in many countries now to try and work on this. And I think the plastics industry themselves have actually realized they've got to play their part in that. So we'll see things like extended producer responsibility become more widespread, whereby the industry understands it has a role to deal with the after-use phase as well as the use phase. At the same time, we'll have more market sectors where I think people will realize that they need to make different choices. One of the things I'm often saying to people is, in terms of your choice as to which is the right material, you need to think about your application. There tends to be an over-focus on the polymers that are being talked about. People are trying to simplify the number of polymers they use and so on, thinking that makes it easier. And to an extent it does. But actually much more critical than that is what's the actual applications that you're going to deliver with each of these materials. And if I can give you a couple of examples in both directions, if you like. So if you buy a carbonated drink in a bottle, that bottle will be polyester. Okay, polyester performs well in that application, and there is an established bottle recycling system for polyester bottles.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal view is don't bring a bioplastic into that arena, certainly not a compostable one that's of a different polymer, because you've actually got a system which, whilst not perfect, is working relatively well, and you might make that system worse. So you shouldn't take bioplastics everywhere. Now let's go the other extreme, and let's think about a tea bag. 25% of a tea bag is actually a plastic polymer.
Really, in the filtering bag
That's right.
itself.
The actual bag itself is 75% a kind of paper and 25% a plastic.
Oh, because
and the reason that
so
tea bag
thin, you need
flow,
the binding of it. You need to keep it
exactly.
together.
So the plastic is what's bound it together. Okay, but then what do you do afterwards? When you've got spent tea, it's recommended, for example, to throw your tea bags on your compost heap. And that's fine for the tea. But then if you ever go and look at your compost afterwards, you'll see these meshes, which is the plastic element which hasn't broken down.
Mm.
You can do that with a bioplastic. You can replace the conventional plastic with the bioplastic, and you have a fully functional tea bag that's 100% biodegradable. So those, I've taken two extremes there of where you should and shouldn't use it.
Right.
And
so
there'll be other examples of that kind of thing. So more and more we'll think about the use phase and the applications in question when deciding the right material. One example, actually, where certain states in the US are ahead of the game, for example, Washington State, where any kind of catering packaging now has to be compostable. And the reason for that is, you think about it, fast food joints, you've eaten the food, you can just have one waste bin for the food and the packaging, and that can all go off for composting. So the whole catering food service arena is an arena where I think we'll see big growth for biodegradable and compostable materials and a reduction in conventional plastics. Another example, and this might sound really trivial, but actually it's quite huge, fruit labels. So those tiny little stickers that you put on fruit and vegetables and so on. They're so small you think they're inconsequential, but you'd be amazed how many hundreds of tons of film get used in that application. Again, they should not be polyethylene, which they are typically. They should be a compostable material. And we're already seeing big growth towards compostables in those areas. So I suppose what I'm saying is, do I see compostables and biomaterials taking over the world rapidly? No. I see them going step by step in the right market areas. And where plastics are actually the best material, I would say don't touch. Make sure you recycle well, but don't necessarily get in the way of some of those market areas.
That makes sense. So the bottle, just back to your water bottle example, the material is usually pretty much empty out of the water bottle. And if you're, I don't know, if you're in an airport, there you can collect these bottles, and then that material can be reused. But if you're using more sticky food substances and you're using, I guess, the polyester containers, you can't really do much because you have to get rid of the bio off of it. That stuff gets in, affects the recyclability. And then it would be much easier if you just can that touch the sticky Cinnabon that you bought, and it just gets put together all together. And that is not that's a bioplastic that disintegrates in a compostable process.
Absolutely right. Where you've got significant food contamination, food residues left, that's absolutely the right space to use biodegradable or compostable packaging, so that you just dispose of it all together and you get maximum value out of that waste.
Can you go back a little bit on what's interesting to me? And this is from somebody, again, I'm not in the space that you're in at all, but what are some of the characteristics that buyers of your product are looking for? Like, what are some things you try to squeeze out, the permeability or the strength of it? What are some of those things like with the biofilms?
It's a good question. One of the interesting things about plastics automatically bring you good barrier to moisture.
Okay.
So if you want to keep a dry product dry, let's imagine what we call a biscuit. In America, you'll call a cookie. If you want to keep a cookie nice and dry, then you use plastic because it's got a good barrier to moisture. Conversely, if you've got fresh foods, you might want to lose a little bit of moisture to actually stop the products going moldy. So some cakes, for example, cheeses, other short shelf life products might actually benefit from losing a little bit of moisture, which is why you sometimes see that they perforate the plastics. Fruit and vegetables, for example, you'll often see holes in there because they're trying to actually make the product breathe more easily. Well, bioplastics are kind of the opposite of conventional plastics. They tend to have lower moisture barrier, quite good gas barrier. So in some fresh fruit applications, bioplastics can actually outperform conventional plastics in terms of protecting the product. From our perspective, we aim to work in a whole range of products. So our company have particular coating technologies where we can modify the barrier characteristics. And so we actually put on the market products which are designed to keep dry foods dry, and other products which are designed to actually allow greater levels of breathability. So we can play tunes on the permeability.
Fascinating. And that it depends again on the applicability or how long the product needs to stay in its packaging before it actually gets consumed, or
Exactly.
That all has to be discussed.
Yeah.
What's it like for, I just think sometimes with more of the high-end natural organic products that you might have smaller companies creating the product and having like more specific places they sell it, right? So they're not coming to you with a giant order necessarily, right?
Yeah.
But it can. So what's the, where's the tension there? Like everybody wants to do better by their products and do better by their environmental footprint, but what's the typical, what's the typical new customer order that you would want to talk to that would work with you guys?
No, you're right. It can be a bit of a challenge because we're not as big as a plastics producer, but we're still bigger than a very small startup company.
1,800 employees. That's pretty big.
Yeah, and I think it's a reasonable size, definitely. So if you've got a small startup company, a small cottage industry, or mom and pops, whatever you want to call them, they can often have requirements which are so small that it's difficult for us to handle. One of the market sectors we've seen develop quite strongly over the last 3 to 5 years is actually bag making. So we'll sell our product to a company who specialize in producing bags, and then that is a great way for the smallest companies to get themselves established by simply buying pre-made bags and filling those bags. We'll work with distributors to a degree who are specialists in supplying smaller amounts. So we might give them a large roll, and from that large roll, they might be able to deliver 2, 3, 4, 5 customers with smaller rolls from that. So that will be the other way of doing it, is to work with local distributors in different countries who can supply a more flexible service than we would otherwise do.
Got it. Because you're producing these sort of giant rolls of the material, and then the customer has to have a way to be able to cut that or process that. And so it sounds to me like you're probably looking for lots of intriguing bag makers out there, or container makers for these products. You'd want to talk to those folks for sure.
That's right. And mostly our customers are what in our language we call the converters, which are the printers of this world. So our films, when they roll off our presses, they're just transparent typically, or we do a few colors, white, we do a metallized version, but they don't have any of the customer designs. So our direct customers are typically the printers. And again, by their nature, they are more used to being able to deliver smaller quantities than we are, because they're used to doing lots of different designs.
In just out of curiosity, for are you guys publicly traded company or private?
No, it's a private company.
Private company. So that's kind of, I'm always wondering, like, if you become a publicly traded company, this would be kind of intriguing space for investors that would want to participate in companies that are creating these sort of novel, I mean, it's not a novel product per se either, right? It's been around for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, we've been around for a little while. I mean, there's Futamura with our product NatureFlex, but then there's the wider industry. So we're one of a number of pioneers in this space. And from an investment point of view, I mean, I think these are attractive companies to look at because they are about the future of the packaging industry. We need packaging. Okay, I know that people give plastics a hard time or packaging a hard time sometimes. The implications of not having packaging are that we go massively backwards in terms of the generation of waste, food waste in particular, which is in reality a much bigger problem. So we've got to get food safely from farm to the consumer's fork. And the question is, how do you do that? Not just safely, but with minimal waste and minimal impact to the environment afterwards. So we're part of a whole trend towards this.
And containers are light enough, which is, again, back to, unless we're going to go back to distributing milk in glass jars, we need, some kind of plastic container that's light to
exactly.
deliver, right? I'm curious to know about, you've been there for many years, and I guess transitioned to the different companies. How would you characterize the biofilms growth for you? Even though we're at 1%, what has it been compared to plastics? Has there been changes in the last 5 years, 10 years for you guys that you've noticed?
It's been growing steadily since we started. Definite increase in the rate, I would say, over the last 3 or 4 years. From a UK and European perspective, we saw a big jump pretty much from the moment a BBC documentary aired, which really highlighted the level of concern over plastics in the environment, and particularly plastics in the sea. So David Attenborough's TV series a few, 3-4 years ago, which really massively increased the focus on this question.
Do you chime into then the sort of new customer orders? Do you check in with them on the continuation? Like, so I would say, okay, great. David Attenborough's, by the way, those documentaries are incredible. I saw a couple of them on Netflix and amazing. But it gets into the news, or it gets into culture. Suddenly there's some customers asking questions that promotes buyers to maybe look into this. But does this kind of thing need to keep happening? Is there like a trailing off year 2, year 3 after kind of that cycle, or have you just simply noticed a steadier growth year to year?
Yeah, we haven't seen any tail off. The growth is steady. It still takes time. So one of the things about our business is often we're packing products which might have a shelf life of a year. So the customer's got to go through the trial phase. They've got to check it works technically on their machines, and then they need to know that they haven't compromised the shelf life of the product. So for us, it's really common for us to see a 2-year lag between the first customer call of interest and actually establishing business, which is a little frustrating.
Cycle, Andy.
It's a little frustrating, I have to say. You just have to get used to it. It's just the way it is. So yeah, it takes time for these things to happen. The other thing that I sense still is, when we've sold plastic materials in the past, people have been interested in kind of a few technical details, but they know plastics, so it doesn't take long to cover those. And then the price, and away you go.
Yes.
With biomaterials, it's been, when you say biodegradable, what do you mean by biodegradable? What kind of standards? Who tests it? When you say compostable, what's the difference to that with biodegradable? What does bio-based mean? What about the energy you use in your process? What about the chemicals you might use as part of the process? So the scale of questions and the complexity of the questions are much, much higher for us as new entrants than they are for the incumbent industry. And it's sometimes a little bit frustrating. You feel like, well, hang on, why are you setting up the benchmark?
Right, when you were
so high for us.
Right. Is that what do you attribute that to? The market's sort of trying to educate itself on it, right?
Yeah, there's an element of that. I think people are also worried about making the wrong move.
Okay.
So they ask question after question after question to make sure that it is the right thing to do. And I've got no problem with that, except that at the same time, go and ask the other industry the same questions.
Right.
So that you're balanced.
Right. It could also be that they just people are already just presuming that, well, plastic's bad, but what are the options here? Let me really get to the bottom of this biofilm thing. I need to understand it. Right.
Yeah.
But so there might not be asking questions. On the other hand, maybe they should go back to that, right? To ask, okay, well, if we're using plastics, how are we dealing with the energy usage there? How do we offset the quote unquote damage of that product that we're not going to be able to, use it in a particular, recycling process, or the energy costs? How do we offset that? I wonder if there are people asking that. Do you have people ask that from the plastic side of the business with you guys?
A little bit, but yeah. One of the things we've tried to do with our customers is to help them to see it a bit more holistically. Because we're often asked, for example, for the carbon footprint.
Okay, yes. Right.
That kind of thing. And what we say to them is, great, yeah, that's an important element, but there's others. We call this our sustainability wheel, and we have these kind of four segments within that. So first of all, where does the raw material come from? Is it fundamentally a finite resource, or is it renewable? And it's quite easy to tell the difference between those by doing a kind of carbon dating test. You can see the level of renewable carbon sources. So that's good, because a renewable resource offers you the ability to be sustainable long term. So we take that as our first element. Okay. Then we do look at things like carbon footprint as the process phase.
Okay.
But we also try and make clear to people, just remember, when you're looking at the carbon footprint, you're seeing a snapshot in time. Okay. And because the biomaterials are typically much more recent, they haven't reached that economy of scale, so they're still in their infancy when it comes to that. So just because, for example, the carbon footprint might not look quite as good as the plastic does, that doesn't mean that in a year or two it isn't going to be better, because they're growing in scale, they're ironing out sort of production inefficiencies and so on and so on. So carbon footprint has to be looked at in context with the kind of age and innovation stage of the material. Then we look at things like shelf life as our third quadrant. So are you going to effectively package the product? Could it be better, or is it good enough? So that's important. And then we finally have the end of life phase. So what are the options with that material afterwards?
What's happening?
Is it recyclable? Is it compostable, home compostable, and so on? So we try to take our customers through those four phases so they see the question in a more holistic way.
So the on the carbon footprint segment there, if I'm hearing you right, it's a part of, we just haven't reached the economies of scale on the extraction and processing.
That's right.
Therefore, we use more energy to get this material, but we need customer orders so that then we can reinvest in bigger machinery, better extraction, better contracts, better suppliers. I mean, that's part of that difficult process of coming into where there's an incumbent that's been there for however long, the plastic industry, right?
I sometimes say to people, imagine Einstein at the age of 3. He couldn't do much on his own. He didn't seem that clever.
Right.
But look what happens. And if you like, in age profile, the bioplastics industry is still a toddler. It's not got the 100 years experience of plastics behind it. It's new materials, still evolving, still changing, processes being fine-tuned. So where we are today with bioplastics is not where we'll be in 5 and 10 years' time. And one of the big changes I think we'll start to see in our industry is, instead of just using raw materials and maybe taking, let's say, the fruit of the crop, we'll be taking the waste of the crop as our feedstocks. So there's a lot of really, really exciting things to come within the whole bioplastics industry that will take it on to another level of sustainability in the next decade.
Is there a way? I mean, I wonder if this is like a marketing, communication challenge, but a sort of compelling consumers and buyers and manufacturers that understanding of, like, when you're buying this, you're paying more, but you're investing in its future. You're helping us all realize that there is a market here, that we can invest. We take those dollars and we can, we expect bigger orders a year from now, so we can actually take a chance on buying better equipment or better processing and really spend even more time, right? Like, how do you sort of keep that conversation going? I mean, you can only have so many, right? With potential customers that walk through the door.
Well, I think the one thing that helps us today, and again, particularly with the pioneer brands within the sustainable foods arena, is that we've got websites and social media, which are ways to communicate much more than ever before. So, let's be honest, not every consumer is motivated by this. And there's different degrees of green, if you like. The greenest guys want to ask lots of questions and they're really motivated by it. And so use your social media sites and your websites to provide that information that it's just not practical to put on pack. On pack, you might be able to give a recipe, you might be able to give a usage guide, the ingredients, but you can't go into the story. But your website and your social media pages are where you can really tell that story and engage. And there are some good examples of brands doing that.
Do you have one that comes to mind? Do you have one?
Yeah, a couple of simple ones over in our market. So in the UK, interestingly, both examples I'll give you are from the tea sector. So in the UK, there's a company called Tea Pigs, and they've got a nice engaging website. And then in Germany, there's a company called Samover Tea, and they've gone as far as actually creating little videos with a German comedian, where they actually have like a one-to-one chat like you and I are having now about where the materials come from, what you can do with them afterwards, and the whole story. So it can be done.
We'll have to take a look, and I presume that the tea market in the UK is pretty significant. So any inroads in there could then bring scale for you guys, right?
Yeah, and I mean, tea as a segment as well. It's got a long history of things like fair trade, ethical sourcing, and it's very different from market to market. So it's surprisingly big in other European countries, but typically more specialty flavored teas, whereas the UK historically is a market for traditional black tea.
Well, just shifting a little bit on this, given you're in the weeds and you've been doing this business for a long time, so you're you might be the jaded guy, kind of, you've seen it all, so it's hard to surprise Andy. But have you? Do you recall any surprising outcomes, either for you guys or for a customer, that was sort of unexpected for both, or for either one? Anything that comes to mind of recent times?
It's an interesting question. I I'm not sure. I do. I think whether this is unexpected or not, I think what we want to see more of is some of the bigger brands making a move, and that's what's going to make the big difference. It's great if you're doing well with pioneer brands, smaller brands, and so on, but actually the impact that can be made by a major brand making a move is huge. If we talk about the scale question again, so I guess that would be my call for action, if you like, it would be to say to some of these bigger brands, guys, you've got a responsibility to do this as well. Now, am I expecting an enormous brand to move an enormous product line? No, and probably it would be a problem if they did actually in the short term, because there might not be the capacity to meet it. But even the big brands tend to have a differentiated product offering. So you may not get the huge, great blockbuster middle of the road product, but they've probably got a more premium product above that, which would be the areas to go after. So that will be the big step change for me in the next few years, is to see the PepsiCos, the Mars, the Unilevers, the Nestle's start to endorse this market sector more than they are at the moment, even if it's with some of their premium brands to begin with.
I mean, those are gigantic ships in the sea that have a hard time just even turning, even if the desire was there, right? But there are in the U.S. good examples. Something like the Walmarts and the Lowe's are pushing their suppliers, saying like, we will give you more shelf space or whatever. They're creating that opportunity for them for these suppliers to compete if they can deliver a more sustainable green product, right?
It's what's needed.
Yeah, and that's the real inflection point at that point, right? Because those are huge. Those are distribution systems at that point, right? And so the scale just to get one product in Walmart, how much you have to prepare to be able to deliver the order is significant. And so for Walmart to say, oh, by the way, we would also give another spot for if you can create this into a premium product with these sustainable things. So I think that is exciting potential, right?
Absolutely.
Do you in the meantime, where do you see the next couple of years for your company in terms of the efforts and investments into this? Are you just sort of taking the orders as they're coming in? There's more of them, so you're just busy just processing through that, or do you see something more you're aiming at?
I mean, we have a 5-year plan with investments within that. Those are investments to increase capacity. They're investments to look at expanding the product range through the introduction of newer technologies and more sustainable technologies as well. So it's exciting times. It really is. We believe that we can make some changes to our manufacturing process, which will widen the range of products that we can put on the market, and at the same time reduce their environmental footprint. So there's some win-wins out there. We're very much an R&D and led organization. One of the great things about becoming part of Futomura as a private company is that it's very much interested in investing in the business. It doesn't have to pay external shareholders and dividends. It wants to grow for the good of the company. So they're very, very supportive of what we're doing there. So the next 5 years we'll see some capacity expansions and some quite significant technological advancements as well.
Is there on the technological ones that I would imagine an R&D company usually has several different potentials, and you're exploring and then testing, and then like you create the product. Can we create the product at certain scales? What's the material? And either one of those projects, they may arrive or they may not at the right amount, there's like a theory behind them. Do you have any that's getting close? So you're kind of that you would be excited that you could maybe hint at or talk about? I don't know if that's even possible, but Do you have anything that's around the corner that looks good?
Our major emphasis right this minute is around our coating technology.
The coating
and we've just installed a new pilot coating machine, and so the next stage is to take that to full industrial level. On the pilot line, what we're seeing is the ability to deliver enhanced barrier, reduced energy to actually create the coatings that we want to work with, and things like improved sealability, so that we can actually have a stronger seal, which gives more protection to the products typically as well. We're not quite close enough yet to sort of launch a new product on this platform, but we're getting closer and closer.
That's the piloting coating tech that you've invested.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like is it just like a giant machine in a room where you sort of put a bunch of vials and it just on the other end of it creates this thing, or is a variety of technology sort of combined?
Yeah, I think the way our R&D works, so we'll be talking with suppliers of raw materials. Have they got some interesting building blocks, if you like, that we can work with? But actually, one of the things that set us apart has been, rather than just taking one polymer and working with it, is actually we take various different raw materials, mix and match, and create our own formulations.
Right.
So we're very much into our own in-house formulation of things.
Got it. And then can you, that's okay. Then I know we need the chief technology officer in our conversations, but I wonder, the raw materials, what are some, like, what's that process like? I mean, are you actually getting, I don't know, corn husks delivered to the organization that you're in a vat extracting it? I mean, what is it like? What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, well, we don't get corn husks, but you're along the right lines in the sense that, sometimes people say, is this a polypropylene or is this a PLA or whatever? In our case, it will never be like that, because it might be a bit of that one and a bit of this and a bit of something else. We really formulate. I've sometimes said it's a bit like Harry Potter with bubbling cauldrons. Okay. It's a little bit more technological than that, but the process is that idea. We need something that's going to bring us some barrier, or we need something that's going to bring us the right slip characteristics to run on the packaging machinery, or something that will give us better heat seal characteristics. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly mixing and matching with the raw materials. We would always see a raw material supplier coming through our doors as a technological opportunity, not just someone who can sell us something cheaper.
Right. Kind of like, okay, well, what does this raw material do? So if somebody were to come in, hey, I have raw materials that come from, I don't know, bamboo. We have a new way of extracting the cellulose out of the bamboo stalks. And so you look at it, you're like, okay, well, what does it constitute? Like, what does it have? Right. And what are the characteristics? That's the beginning process for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So if you come through our doors, we kind of, well, what have you got? Where does it come from? What does it do? And even if it's not fully functional in its own right, that doesn't mean it's not interesting, because it might be that we complement the bit that it lacks with something else.
And then, of course, if it looks intriguing, you also have to how much of it can we get consistently, right? Those are conversations that happen to you as well, right? You might have a wonderful product, but there's just not enough farmers or enough whatever growing fast enough. There's not enough of a market there to then really stamp it into products, right?
Yeah. And I think what you'll see happen more as well is there's a concept out there called the biorefinery. And I think that is a big thing of the future. So if we come into the plastics world, you have an oil refinery. And that oil refinery doesn't just make petrol or diesel, it makes effectively a number of different constituents that go into different areas. And you'll see this, it's starting to happen, and you'll see more and more of this, the biorefinery, where you mentioned things like the corn husks or whatever. You can imagine those kind of raw materials going into places like that and then delivering a range of different products coming out of it, which then are of interest to people like ourselves to then deliver packaging materials and so on from that.
Because the trick is to get actual consistency with certain variability that's acceptable, that a marketplace would pay for, and then the confidence that you can keep getting that material for the products you're making.
That's right.
Andy, wow, that was an hour. I feel like I could keep going, picking your brains to understand more of this world, but thank you so much. I feel like I just got an education in the biofilms market. If there's someone out there listening, is intrigued to find out more information about your company and you, what's a good place to go for that?
Easiest place is to go onto the NatureFlex website.
NatureFlex.
So www.natureflex.com.
All right. Andy, once again, thank you. This was fascinating. I wish you the best of luck. And I would love to do this again if you have something to announce, when you have a new debut of a new area, new material. Maybe we can explore how that came to be.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure.
That would be cool.
There's some exciting things coming in the next 2 to 5 years. So it'd be great to talk again.
All right. And thank you guys for listening or watching. I know the YouTube channel could use some more views. So if you're there, click like, click subscribe, all that. That helps us a lot. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
For more episodes of Through the Noise, go to throughthenoise.us.